a lot to go. So, I was thinking that, hey, we need to learn some HTML, right? And what better way to learn HTML than to actually build a site from scratch, right? And so we're going to build a site from scratch. And this site is actually going to be a fan club page for none other than Beyoncé. Because who doesn't want to build a website for Beyonce? You know what I'm saying? Like, I just was like, we need something to do that will teach us HTML, but we also need to celebrate Beyonce. So I was like, let's just make a web page that's gonna do that, right? So that's exactly what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a little fan club welcome page for Beyonce. You know what I'm saying? Don't worry if you're new to the coding space or, getting this HTML stuff together. We're gonna start from scratch and we'll get it going every step of the way. And yeah, you'll have a nice little web page to showcase your love for Beyonce. So let's make this happen. So first things first, let's get the foundations of our web page together. So you can open up any text editor. For the purposes of this, I'm going to use VS Code, but you could use whatever text editor you are accustomed to. And we're going to start by creating a new project. So like I told y'all, I love starting new projects in VS Code in a very specific way. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say file and I'm going to go open. I like to do this little hack of doing it this way just to create a folder for myself. So in my desktop, I have a nice little folder for all my code projects. So in this one, I'm going to create a new folder and I'm going to call it Beyonce fan page. Create that folder and boom. I like to open this folder this way so that VS Code opens with an actual folder for me already and I can save my files easier. So rather than just say new file, I like to start with a folder just so that it makes my life a little bit easier down the road. So cool, you know what I'm saying? We got a first step, we're getting there, right? We got a nice little code organization. So the next step is we need to start by creating a file that's gonna be the structure of our web page, and that's gonna be our HTML file. So what I'm gonna do is create a new file in VS Code. I'm gonna call it, when it pops up, sorry, it's loading a little bit. I'm gonna call it index.html. And so this file is going to be the starting point for all things Beyonce in our application here. So this particular code, I'm just gonna write some stuff in here and we're gonna talk a little bit about what's going on in it in a second. So the first thing I wanna do is add this declaration at the top. That's gonna say doc type HTML. And this is a declaration to just let us know in VS Code land that we're actually working on an HTML document. The next thing I'm going to do is open up another tag. Sorry, my computer's freaking a little bit. HTML tag, just like so. And let me zoom in a bit. Sorry, forgot to do that. Open up this HTML tag, right? And I'm gonna just add a couple more things and then we'll pause real quick. So I'm gonna add this head and then I'm gonna add this body. Bet. Awesome. So right now, what we have here in these first 5 lines of code is a valid HTML document. This document isn't gonna really be that helpful to us because it doesn't really show anything interesting, but it is a valid HTML document because it contains the key pieces of an HTML document. It contains this declaration that basically says, hey, this document that we're writing in is a HTML document. And then this tag from line 2 to 5, I'm gonna close it real quick. This tag right here is an HTML document tag. One of the things I love about VS Code is that if you hover over these tags, it'll actually give you some descriptions about what these different elements are. And so you're hearing me say a couple of different words right now. You're hearing me say tag, element, right? So the idea here is in HTML, we use these, what we call tags to refer to the different elements that will be eventually shown on our web page, right? A tag is essentially a simple kind of character set in HTML documents that follow a similar convention. They start with this less than and greater than signs right here, right? So here we have this less than sign with HTML and then the greater than sign that closes it off, right? Some people call them angle brackets, and we use those angle brackets to essentially write what the name of the tag is going to be. So every HTML tag has this kind of angle bracket, the name of the tag, and then a closing, and then the other opposite angle bracket. What makes HTML tags a little bit confusing is that you also can open tags and then you close tags. So what we're seeing on line 2 is an open HTML tag, and what we're seeing on line 5 is a closed HTML tag. So this would be an entire kind of HTML tag because it opens and closes at a certain point. You might be wondering, well, why doesn't the doc type HTML have a closing thing for that? The reason why is because this isn't actually a tag as much as it's just a declaration for the document itself. So this isn't necessarily an HTML tag, but everything we're seeing from lines 2 to 5 is a valid HTML tag, right? So the HTML tag for the document itself is represented with this HTML tag here. The head and the body are two of the elements that are the most important elements in any HTML document. The head is an element that we use for metadata, and we'll see what that means in a second. The body is what we use for all of the visual components of our website, and we'll also see what that means in a second. So I want to take that quick pause to say, boom, if you got this far, you actually made your first HTML document. But hey, this is not enough to impress Beyoncé, so we need to keep on going, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple things. We're going to add a couple things into the head, and then I'm going to add a couple things into the body. So what we see here is I just added a couple different metadata tags into our head, right? And so if you remember when I hovered over the head, it says, hey, the head element represents a collection of metadata. So what is metadata, right? Well, metadata is data that the HTML document might need to know for its own purposes to show itself correctly. Things like a character set, right? So if I'm using the standard keyboard set in the US, right, which is UTF-8, right? I would want this document to know, hey, the character set that's being used is that character set. Another thing that you see common in different web applications is folks using a meta tag for defining the viewport of the website, which basically is like what is the actual visible area that's going to be used on that website. These are just some examples. I'm not going to say you need them on every website you're doing, but I just wanted to put them in there so you had a better idea of what metadata meant when we talk about the head. But two of the things that you might really understand, and we could just use just off rip, is the title tag, which is an element that we use for defining the title of a web page, is the title tag. And then the link element, which we'll use to link this HTML document to some CSS in a second. So those are, if you think about it, right, these things are important with relationship for the HTML document to know so that it can show itself and show things appropriately. But none of this really is stuff visual that we would see on the HTML website itself. And we can actually confirm this real quick by just saving this document. So saving this index.html, right? And if I just go to, let's see, let me open a new window in my browser. So I'm going to open a new window in Brave and we'll see this real quick. So open up this new window in Brave and it just opened up right now. So in this new window, right, if I go to File, Open File, and I pull up this code project for the Beyoncé fan page, right? This index.html we're working on. And I press enter, right? Well, something came back, this big white screen, right? Not necessarily what I expected, but it is something, right? If I, like we've talked about, go ahead and look at the source of the page, right? I'll see, hey, well, here's that same HTML document that we just started working on in VS Code, right? Is here for us to see. But clearly, nothing is showing up visually, despite the fact that there's actually a bunch of stuff here in the head, right? So the head is always going to be stuff that doesn't show up visually on your HTML. It's always going to be the things that the HTML site might use for its own knowledge, but not necessarily anything that is visual, right? Things like that title, which is important for the site to know about itself, we can see did come up, right? So we know that HTML is connected, right? Because we have that title showing up in the tab. And this link tab, which we'll talk about a lot more in a second when we get to the CSS of this, is not really showing us anything, but it's just telling the HTML, hey, you know, we're going to link you to a particular file for the styling that we're going to use in a little bit. The body is actually where all the magic happens. So let's go back to our VS Code and take a look at the body element and what we can do there. So the body element of a HTML website is exactly where your content will go. So whenever it comes time to building out a web page, your head is where you define stuff that is in terms of the metadata or the things that the site needs to know about itself in order to show itself correctly. And then the body is actually where your content goes, the stuff that you expect to see, the things that you interact with as a user, right? All of that is stored in the HTML body. And the body is a part of the HTML document, but it is the most important part for seeing the visual elements. The head is the most important part for defining the connections to different pieces of data or different files that you might link to your HTML. But the body is where we actually create that content that we're going to eventually use. So just as a recap, because I saw a couple questions, we have the HTML tag, right? A tag is essentially just an open angle bracket, open angle open angle bracket. I'm so sorry, with the name of the particular element that you're going to show. In this case, the HTML tag, right, is this opening tag here and this closing tag. And everything defined inside of this HTML tag, right? Inside of these HTML tags, the opening and closing is our HTML document. So the HTML tag defines the document. It's the root of our document. And that becomes important when we start wanting to find elements inside of our document. We need to use this HTML document tag to then see all of the elements inside of it. So every HTML page you use has all of the head and body elements wrapped with this HTML tag. The HTML tag, like I just said, has a head and a body. The head is where we store all of the metadata for that particular document. The body is where your content goes for what you want to show on that document. So just quick show of thumbs. If that's making sense to you, just give me a quick thumbs up and we'll keep it pushing. You know, try to get our Lord and Savior Beyoncé to really, you know, mess with us for this site. All right, Gucci. Okay, so like we just talked about, the head doesn't really do much for us in terms of visuals. So let's get into some of the stuff that will help us, right? Things related to the body. And just to kind of show you what I mean here, let's say, for instance, I want to have in this document, I want to just add something really simple, like maybe like a little message that says, welcome to the Beyoncé, gotta get that accent, fan club, right? Drop in the chat if you think there's a dope emoji I should put after that. Just drop in the chat what that emoji is. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to disappoint Beyonce or any of her stans. Anyway, we're gonna save this and we're gonna go back to that same file that we were taking a look at on Brave, right? So if you remember, I pulled that file up on Brave and originally it was not showing anything here. The body was empty. So if I refresh this, cool, we see that there's now some H1 in there. But if I go to the actual site and I refresh this, well, boom, now we actually have something actually showing up visually on our fan club page. You know what I'm saying? Like, hey, one step closer to being brought on stage at the Renaissance tour. You know the vibes. So that is what the body is for, right? We want to actually see things come up on this web page. And so in order to do that, we need to define that content in the body. So clearly, now that we see that things are showing up, let's talk about what is showing up and what that element actually is. So the element that we just wrote is actually an element that's really important in HTML. It's one of, I think, 5 of a similar type of elements, which is a heading. And a heading is essentially just a piece of text that is given a specific size and font weight based on the size that it is. So here we have it defined as H1. There's also H2s, which are slightly smaller. So if I go back and show you this now, refresh this real quick, right? You can see that it kind of decreased in size a little bit. So headings just kind of have different sizes attached to them, and we use those different sizes in order to basically have text of different sizes on the screen. One thing that's cool to say is, what if I got rid of this H1 tag and just kind of left it as is? Give me a thumbs up if you think if I save this and refresh everything, we'll see actually this text. And give me a thumbs down if you think, hey, no, that's not going to work because that's not HTML. See some thumbs up, see some thumbs up, see a couple thumbs down. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? What's gonna happen, right? I don't have this wrapped in any element or anything like that, right? Well, what's gonna happen? So let's save this, right? We're gonna go back to our little fan club page, and I'm gonna just refresh here first so we can see that that change was made in the inspector. So clearly the source file and on the Brave is now updated with what we have. So drum roll, please. Let's see what happens here. I refresh and boom, actually that text is showing up. And why is that happening? Well, text is actually a valid HTML element. So you don't actually, if you want to just show specific text, you don't have to wrap that text in an HTML element if you don't want to, because the text itself will count as HTML and HTML will visualize it. So just a little fun fact just for everybody there. Of course, we don't want to do that. We want Beyoncé to know that we are here for her. So we're going to keep that as an H1. So I'm going to go ahead and just put that back, but y'all know the vibes. At this point, y'all might be saying like, okay, well, cool. Like, you know, like is this what being in HTML, like making HTML files is? And the answer is yes. It's all about like kind of defining these different tags and putting it together so we actually see what we want to see visually on our webpage. So I'm going to go ahead and add a couple more elements, and then we're going to, just try to finish this page up so that it's just helpful for what we want to do for Beyoncé. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to add another element onto our document. So again, anything that I want visually in our document has to be done within the body. Right. And as you can see, the HTML is nested. So the head and the body both contain a number of elements, right? Here in the head, you can see I have like 4 elements inside of there. In the body, I only have 1 for now, but each of the elements that I want inside of the body are placed inside, like so inside of this tag. So the body tag opens here on line 9, closes on line 13. Anything that I want to see visually has to be between lines 9 and 13. Otherwise, it won't show up appropriately. So I want to show more things. So I'm just going to go underneath this H1 tag and just add a couple more elements, right? So the next element I want to add is actually an image tag. And an image tag is actually very interesting because when we close tags normally in HTML, we see that we open the tag like so, and we close the tag like so, right? There's a clear opening and then there's a clear closing. And those opening and closing tags typically have something nested in between them as well, right? With images, they're a great example of a different type of tag in HTML, which is a self-closing tag. We actually see another one happening on line 7 with this style, with this link. The link is actually another element that does a self-closing tag instead of nested kind of open and closing tags. The reasons why is just based on how they define the HTML itself and what each tag actually does, right? So the image tag is a very interesting tag, right? Because we can use this tag to bring an image into our webpage. So in order to do this, the image tag also is going to need for us to pass some data into it so it knows as an image, what should I be showing, right? And so the way that we can add that knowledge for this image tag of, hey, here's what you're going to be showing is what we call an attribute. An attribute is essentially a little piece of data that we give the tag so that it knows, just data that we pass to the tag so that it can use that data and what it does, right? So the image tag needs a very specific attribute for giving it the data that it will show as an image. that attribute is actually the SRC attribute, which is short for source, but it's just written out SRC. And this attribute is meant for us to pass a URL to a particular image. So it says here, this attribute is mandatory for the image element. Browsers using source set, source is treated like a candidate image. Basically, images can also you can also define multiple images that might come back, and you use a different attribute called source set. But the source attribute is a mandatory attribute for the image, because if you don't define what the image is you want the image to show, the image can't show the image you want it to show. That sounded like a tongue twister that I didn't want to do intentionally, but there you go. So we want to pass an image in here, right? And VS Code is real helpful. It helps start to autofill some stuff for you. And in this image, you can see it's waiting for me to pass a URL. Now, this is a great reminder opportunity for me to say, thank my sponsors who made the World Wide Web, Sir Tim Berners-Lee and his team, because they created the actual URLs, right? And URLs are what we call uniform. I'm going to write it right here. Uniform resource locators, right? And that's what URLs are. So when we say a URL, we're talking about a uniform resource locator. And essentially, that is just a path to a specific file, right? So a URL kind of looks something like this, right? It's just a path to a specific file. And typically, when we use URLs, we can actually reference files on our actual computer if the file exists, or we can pass a link to a URL that is existing online somewhere, right? And so let's do that way first so that I can show y'all and talk a little bit about what's going on there. So first, what we're gonna do, we're gonna go back to our browser, and we're gonna go ahead and open a new tab. We're gonna go to images. Actually, let's go to Giphy, you know what I'm saying? Because I like to be unique here. Got some people popping into the waiting room, sorry. So let's go Tinder. We're get some GIFs real quick. And here, I'm just gonna go ahead and look for a GIF, a nice GIF of Beyonce, you know what I'm saying? Like, why not? Because we need the queen to love us. And so go ahead. I like this nice little wholesome Beyonce GIF right here. Boom. You know what I'm saying? Nothing like this. So cool. So what I'm finna do is I want to get a reference to this image, right? And so you might know that you can do this on your computer. You might not know that you can do this on your computer, but you can get a reference to another particular image, right? By right-clicking on that particular image and looking for something that says something to the effect of copy image address or open image in new tab or something like this. Copy image address, right? What is that doing? Well, if I go to a new tab and I paste what it just copied, you see it has a link right now, right? This link, I'm trying not to use the same language. This link right here, right? If I press enter, this link pulls up clearly that same image, right? This link is called a URL, right? We call this a URL because what this link is doing, actually, if we break it down, we're going to the Tenor.com's server, right? Which is hosting this particular file. And then everything I just told you about file paths is the same. So on the Tenor.com server, this file path has a file inside of it called this, and that whole thing altogether is a URL that exists online, right? So you're used to dealing with files on your own computer, and those files have particular URLs, right? Just like our index.html file, right? So you can see here, this file path //users/ Camino desktop code projects, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is the URL to my index.html file on my computer. That's why it looks all crazy, because it's going through all the particular folders on my computer. But we have different URLs that we reference all the time in our day-to-day life online, right? Because every server that is online that we're accessing data from puts certain information up that we can reference using a URL, and that's how we actually get to it, right? And so here I have this URL representing this particular GIF on the Tenor website. So what I want to do is go back to my HTML page for my lovely Beyonce fan page, and I'm going to replace this little little string here with that actual URL that we just copied. So now the image has a source with a valid URL path. We just tested it on the browser, so we know that this path should show the file. So what I'm going to do is save this, go back to our lovely HTML, page, and refresh, and boom. Now we have our nice little heading for welcome to the Beyonce fan club. We got a nice little GIF, you know what I'm saying? She's even like inviting people in. She's like, oh yeah, you know what this is, you know what I'm saying? They made this in Cam's class. We lit, you know what I'm saying? So boom. Quick show of thumbs, you know what I'm saying? If everything I'm talking about is making sense to you so far, give me a quick show of thumbs, you know what I'm saying? I love it. I love it. I love y'all. You know what I mean? We're doing this for y'all. You know what I'm saying? I love Beyonce, but I'm doing this for y'all. All right, cool. Bet. Awesome. So let's keep it pushing, right? This can't be a fan club if people can't really come into the fan club or, you know, do something specific. So let's maybe do something like give people an opportunity to check out Beyonce's website. You know what I'm saying? Beyonce has a dope website. We should have actually looked at this first. We should have been like, let's just be Beyonce's website. I want to say it's Beyonce.com, but I'm not sure. So let's see what pulls up. Okay. Yeah. Beyonce is rich enough to own Beyonce.com. I don't know why I didn't expect that, but there it is. So you can see her website is actually really lit. You know what I'm saying? It's kind of making me feel like, dang, our website kind of trash, but hey, we on our way there. We on our way there. You know what I'm saying? We on our way there. We can make this website in a different domain. But just since we're here, it would be cool to right click. Remember, you can right click on any website that you go to and click view page source if you want the source to pop out into its own tab like this. Clearly this one's a little bit harder to read, so I'm actually going to click this line wrap thing. Ooh, Beyonce got that. She got that real code website. You know what I'm saying? That's no simple website. And of course, it's Beyonce. You know what I mean? But you can see her source code right here if you wanted to take a look, deeper dive into the website she's using. Funny thing is, she's using Next. We're gonna be using some Next stuff in our class, so that's real dope. But long story short, we can also inspect this tab. If we right click and instead of saying view page source, you say inspect, what you'll see that pops up is the inspector, and the inspector will have another way for you to look at all of the different elements in on Beyonce's website. For us, you know, we're not doing anything nearly as sophisticated as what she's doing right now. All we want to do, though, is get a link to this website, right? And we just want it so that if somebody comes to our fan club page, that they can get a nice little link that says, hey, you know, check out Beyonce's super actual website that is not nearly as low level as ours. So we can just put a link somewhere for somebody to say, hey, you know, like go check out Beyonce's actual website because ours is not it. So let's do that. Let's add that link to Beyonce's website and make it easy for people to go there. So what I'm going to do is go back to VS Code real quick, and I want to add a new element to this particular site. So again, all the elements that I want to show visually need to be within the body, right? So we have our H1 in there, we have our image in there. So the next thing I want to add in there is actually an anchor, which is a very unique element in HTML. We use it to create links. And so the anchor, I'm going to just kind of finish it up real quick and then we'll talk about it. So I'll put this and inside. Okay, so this is an anchor tag, and an anchor tag is just like some of these other tags we see. They're not self-closing. They kind of wrap some HTML. And so an anchor tag, also just like an image, requires us to pass an attribute that will contain the actual URL that this anchor is going to point to, right? And an anchor can point to particular pages, web pages. It could point to a particular file. It could point to anything that's supported by HTML, as you can see here. You need, just like with an image, you need a source. With anchors, you kind of need this href for it to work the way you expect. Unlike an image, which kind of self-closes, like you see, once you define the image and the source, you don't really need anything. The image doesn't really wrap anything, right? But the anchor gives you an opportunity to wrap something. If I save this as it is, right? Let's just go back and take a look at what that was doing for us on our little fan club page and refresh here. So I refresh and we don't actually see anything. So, well, I want people to see like, hey, you know, like, hey, I want a link here, right? So the anchor gives us an opportunity to actually define a little bit of text that that link will contain. So essentially the text might be something like Beyonce's super, oh, forgot my grammar for a second, super legit real website, right? If I save this and I go back to our lovely bootleg Beyonce fan club website and I refresh, you can see now we have a link to Beyonce's super legit real website. Not looking the best, you know what I'm saying? But it's here, right? If I click this link, it actually will take us to Beyonce's website. Boom. So I have all the pieces that I want, right? That's looking good so far. If I go back to my particular little file, we can see now we have all the little pieces that we would need to actually make this website a real thing for people who are joining our fan club to go ahead and see Beyonce's super legit real website. Of course, we might want to add other things to our fan club site. You know what I'm saying? We might do that over time. Maybe by the end of all of these lessons, I'll have an actual Beyonce website ready for for our use. But right now, this is, like I said, just meant to show us some examples. But there's stuff that's missing here. And, you know, the things that are missing are the things that separate a website like this from Beyonce's lovely website like this, right? Like, wow, like it'd be great to make a website that's beautiful like this. And it clearly seems as though what Beyonce is investing in is some styling, right? So styling is like one of those things that will make even the simple website look dope, right? Because if you think about it, this website ain't really doing too much right now, at least this page, right? The first page was doing a lot, but this page ain't really doing too much, right? It also has an image. It also has some text, you know what I'm saying? It is just kind of here stylistically, right? So what we might want to do is figure out how can we actually make our site a little bit more stylistically acceptable for us, right? And that's exactly where HTML stops and CSS begins, right? Remember what I said was HTML is the structure of our web page. So HTML will give us everything we need. Here's all the pieces. CSS is how do you want to put these pieces? How do you want to layer these pieces so that it looks the way you want it to look? Right. And that's subjective. The design part is pretty subjective. You can choose what design works for you, but the HTML is not subjective. If you want an image, you got to say you want an image. You know what I mean? Like that's not subjective, but how that image is positioned, how it's structured, that is kind of up to the stylistic discretion of the designer of the particular site. So in this case, I might want to just do a couple little small tweaks to just make this site a little bit more designed friendly. So, and just to show y'all a little bit more of how we actually connect HTML and CSS. And a lot of it actually is being done for us already on line 7, right? So line 7 is a very important line when it comes to taking a regular HTML site, which legitimately could just only include, right? This HTML site could theoretically only include this stuff right here, and it will still show exactly what we showed earlier, right? None of the stuff in the head was necessarily doing anything for us that is driving what we're seeing visually here, but all of these elements in the body are, right? So if I were to go ahead, let me just save this real quick to prove that point. Go back to our little fan club and refresh, and boom, you know, nothing has changed from the visual standpoint of what we're actually seeing on the body, because the body is what is responsible for that. But as you can see, the title of this page just changed. It went back to this index.html, right? So I don't want it to, I want some stuff in my head to allow for those things to be the case. But the biggest thing that the head was doing for us so far was just creating this title. And then, you know, we put a couple pieces of metadata in there that aren't really changing too much for our site. Matter of fact, I could get rid of them if I wanted to, but for the sake of just the example and finishing it up as it is, I'll leave it in there. But I encourage you to test this. You could get rid of these things and you'll see nothing really has changed visually because all of the visual elements are defined here in the body, right? The one other element in the head, though, that is really gonna help us is this link element here, right? And the link element is a very unique element as well because it allows you to link your HTML document to other resources. Now, that comes in handy when we are typically using links. We typically use links for creating a connection between an HTML page and a CSS file. That's like the one place you'll see that link tag come up all the time is when you need to connect a regular HTML page to a CSS file. So we create a link that says, hey, I'm going to create a link to a CSS style sheet. And that style sheet is going to have this particular name, a URL to it. This is a URL also. Remember the href, we used it in the anchor, right? This href is pointing to whatever file is going to be our stylus file, right? So typically we'll have our HTML file, we'll write our HTML like this, but then when we start getting into styles land, we end up creating a new file that is typically going to be held for creating all of our styles. And that in this case is this styles.css file that you just saw me create in VS Code. The index.html is basically saying, hey, I'm going to link to a file called styles.css because you don't see any slashes or, other things here, like, right? Like it just kind of had the name. What this URL is actually saying is inside of the folder that this HTML document is in, there's a file called styles.css, and I'm linking to that file. Again, this is what makes it important for you to manage your files appropriately in your code, because it won't reference your files correctly if they don't exist, right? So because I'm saying, hey, styles.css is where the style sheet is being linked, I need this styles.css file to be within the same folder for this to work. But now that I have this styles.css file, I can really start to style my site in a manner that feels comfortable to me as a designer. And just to kind of get us going with the basics and making sure this is all hooked up right, let me just save this so there's no changes here. We talked about the HTML document, right? And everything that's connected in the HTML document is within line 2 to 15. The HTML document has different elements inside of it, starting with the head and the body. And then each of those elements have other elements within them, right? So they're nested. The body, like we talked about, is where all the visual stuff is happening now. So with CSS, I'm typically going to want to be able to say, hey, I want to make this element, this H1 element centered or something, or I want to make this image a specific size. Or, like maybe like make this anchor a little bit more interesting or whatnot, right? So those are the types of things that are helpful with CSS, but it requires the CSS to say, I know which element I'm particularly going to change. And in order to do that, CSS uses its own particular syntax in order to make that possible. That syntax is pretty simple when you think about it later, but for first-time folks, it might not be so simple to kind of understand everything going on in there. So let's do a very simple thing. Let's say I want to take this H1 that says, welcome to the Beyoncé fan club. And I want to do something very simple, like maybe change the color of it. So I will say, hey, I want that H1 that I had on this file to be blue or something, right? So the way CSS works is like so. You define the types of elements you want to style with a particular CSS rule, if you will. So CSS defines different rules for your document of style rules, right? So one rule might be, hey, if there's an H1 element in the document, I want that H1 document, I want the color of that H1 to be blue, right? And this rule is basically saying, hey, for any H1, it's selecting all of the H1s in the document. And it says, hey, for any H1 in that document, give it a color of blue, right? So color is a particular CSS key, like it's a property that we can define on these elements. And then this is the value that we're setting for that particular property. So if I save this styles.css and I go back to our lovely Beyonce fan club page, blue is not it. It's unless we're talking about Blue Ivy, but you know what I'm saying? But here, now we can see that text just turned blue, right? And the reason it turned blue is because we connected our HTML page, first of all, to have inside, we did it in the head, but we connected it to say, hey, we're going to define some styles for this web page in this styles.css file. And we link that style sheet in our HTML head. Typically, this is how you see people do it when they link their CSS. Another way you'll see people create CSS is they'll just actually add the CSS into the HTML document itself. Typically, folks try to avoid that because it makes the HTML document a little bit harder to read. But creating a separate style sheet also keeps your styling consistent because you can use the same file across multiple HTML pages. The H1 changing the color to blue is just an example, right? And so here might be a couple more examples of some CSS that I might want to you might see used in a project like this, right? So here's a couple other CSS rules with values and properties, right? So this particular CSS rule, a rule is defined via these curly braces and the selector in front of it. A selector basically is going to look at whatever you type here in the selector is basically what the CSS file is going to say is I'm going to look in your document for any element that matches this. VS Code does this really cool thing with CSS files where if you highlight over the selector, like which is everything before the curly brace, it will show you which elements will be returned from that particular selector. So clearly this body CSS rule is going to be defining any changes on the body, right? In our body, clearly we do have a body tag here, and that would mean that this entire body element will be changed via this styling here. The H1 we just saw, right? We changed the color to blue. The text align is actually a really cool property that will align it to being in the center. The image, we saw the image, you know, this is defining some properties on that image in terms of its size. So it's saying things like, hey, the max width of this image will be whatever 100% of the regular width is. The reason that's important is because if you try to scale an image that's too small, it won't actually show correctly. So this is just saying, hey, you know, don't make this bigger than what it needs to be. And the height we're putting as auto, which basically says adjust the height to whatever the width is. So that will scale the image appropriately. This margin is basically putting a margin in between in different places within the particular image. So we'll paste it, see what it does, and then tweak some of the CSS in a bit. Here we see this CSS is targeting a P tag, right? But currently we don't have any P tags in here. So that CSS isn't going to actually apply to anything yet. But when we add a P tag, we'll see that P tag will get that style. So we'll see that in a second. But we do have an anchor tag. And what this anchor tag with this CSS, what it is doing here is it's saying, hey, get rid of that underline. So if we go back to our lovely Beyonce fan page, you see how this anchor has this little underline here. Well, that underline, if we want to get rid of that underline, we can use the CSS property text decoration to say, hey, I don't want it to be underlined. Here you can also change the color of it and give it a margin. So just give it some, tell it like how much space should it not will be around it as extra space, etc. So these are just like some fundamental CSS things. Again, in the body, we're seeing a couple different things here. The font family is one that allows you to change the particular font of like what text is being used inside of the body. Margin, again, is a particular property that allows you to set some of the spacing around an element. Another similar element or similar property in CSS for spacing and things is padding. Display flex is what we use in order to kind of make things in a container and position the things within that container in a specific way. Right now, I'm not doing anything too particular with it, but again, I'm just putting this here as examples of certain things, not necessarily saying your website needs to have these things, but just giving you some more examples of particular CSS that might be on a site that you're building in the future. With the display flex, you can position the elements inside of the container, and that's what flex direction, align items, and justify content is doing. This is giving a minimum height of our body and saying, hey, the minimal height of our body will actually be 100% of whatever the view height is. So this basically says whatever we see on the page, that will be the minimum height of the body, and then we're giving it this background color. So let's save this styles.css. Let's go back to our lovely Beyoncé fan page and look at a before and after. So this is our before, right? And this is our after. Wow. Okay. You know what I'm saying? Hey, we kind of going somewhere, fam. You know what I'm saying? Look at that. You know, like nice centered text. The color is cool. I'm not too mad at the color. Got this link. It doesn't have an underline on it. So sometimes the underline is helpful because it lets people know that there's a link there that they can click. But sometimes, you know, you can get around it. So clicking this still will take us to the Beyoncé website. But that CSS is coming in clutch and making our site look a lot more nice, as I would say. So going back real fast, let's just go through what we just did, right? So we made an index.html file, and we used that HTML file to define all of the visual elements that we wanted for creating this Beyoncé fan page. The various elements that come in an HTML document are all part of what is defined as the HTML tag. The HTML tag contains a head and a body. The head is all of the elements that are that we use for metadata or like linking to that particular HTML file. The body is all the visual stuff that we would actually expect to see. And so all of the things that we're seeing on our web site are happening in the body, and we can confirm that by going back to it real quick. And like I said, we can view the page source one, or one thing that's really helpful that we can do is we can inspect this particular page. And inspecting this page will do something really cool, because when you inspect the page, you can actually see what HTML elements are tied to what pieces of this document. So let me just pull this back and do this real quick. Whoops. I want to move this to the bottom so it's easier to see. And then, well, no, let me move it to the side so it's not in the way. All right, cool. So, right, like here I can see all the elements, right? Clearly, when I hover over HTML, the whole page is highlighted, right? Because the entire page is considered the HTML document. That HTML document has a head. Highlighting over that, you don't see anything highlight because there's no actual visual data defined in the head. The only thing that is visually defined in the head is this title that says Beyoncé Fan Club, which is what makes this tab say that. One thing that's cool about the inspector is you can change things in the inspector of a website, and those changes will reflect in your browser. But these, once you refresh, those changes go away. So it's, you can make cool little quick changes and test things on the inspector. But again, once we refresh, those changes go away. So nothing visual is in the head, right? But when I hover over the body, all of this visual stuff starts to get highlighted again. And going into the body a little bit more, once I highlight over these specific elements, you can see what they correspond to. So the H1 heading element corresponds to that top level text. That image element corresponds to the image that we made. Remember, the image has a source and we had to get that link to that particular image. The anchor element at the bottom, which is the link, has a href, which is also kind of a URL that this anchor is going to point to, right? And we use these elements to create the document of our HTML page, and that document allows us to build these web pages. So for you to take this Beyonce fan club to the next level, right, you might want to add stuff to this particular web page, right? And what you need to do that is identify what HTML elements you want to be adding to that particular page. One very helpful resource for kind of the process of like learning HTML, CSS, JavaScript, etc., is the W3 schools. I love their website because it's a bunch of free resources focused on the web, right? And so they have tutorials, exercises, all types of stuff for HTML, CSS, JavaScript. They even have Python, Java, React. They have all types of stuff in here. Anything related to web dev stuff, you can find some of the resources here in the W3 schools. In the HTML reference that they have a lot of different content about all of the different HTML elements that you can think about. Most of these are probably very common. We talked about headings, we talked about images, like all of that is here. But they have a really cool reference inside the reference to the HTML tag list, where you can kind of search through all the different HTML tags that exist and figure out, like, you might say, hey, you know, I need an HTML tag for video. Oh, cool. There's a video tag that I could use. Or I need an HTML tag for text, right? Well, some of this search might not be the best because it doesn't necessarily pull up everything up, but you know, text area is a great text for that. You know, the H1 is for headings, right? So if you didn't know, like, this is called a heading, you might not see this tag, but just generally poking your head on in all of these different tags could be a very helpful way for you to see what other things might you add to the Beyonce fan club page to make it the page of your dreams and Beyonce's dreams. And so with that, I'm gonna sign off, you know what I'm saying? I think that's good for now, but yeah, we'll definitely want to add. What things would you add to that particular page when you had a chance to add more things to the body?